This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, for which I thank you, obviously. I don't know yet whether we will dive into this video. I'm a bit torn. There's a wonderful piece. One of those columnists that I find most engaging, because sometimes I think he's lost the plot completely, and sometimes I think he's expressed reality better than anybody else in the business. Daniel, now Lord Finkelstein, writing in the Times today about why Bannon's Hitler salute confuses the right, and the necessity of continuing to describe and condemn it, not to be embarrassed, even if the reaction that these monsters want is for us to be outraged. I really struggle with this, and I struggled with it this morning when this video of on one of Donald Trump's social media accounts that I am going to struggle to describe. And I think I got one reply saying, "Oh, don't talk about it. That's what they want." And a little tiny bit of me thought, "Really? Is that true? Should I not talk about?" And then I thought, yes, that's really good advice. That the leader of the free world, the currently still, for now, temporarily free world, most important person politically on the planet, the most powerful man on the planet, the man who holds the future of nations in his hands, the current incumbent of the Oval Office, he goes, "Let's just ignore him." That's just stupid. And I don't use that word. I probably use that word a bit more often than I should, but I don't use it uncautiously in this context. Absolutely stupid to say just ignore it. They just want to distract you from all the other stuff that they're doing. Well, guess what? I can hold two thoughts in my brain at the same time. I can talk about the mad, incomprehensible propaganda, and I can talk about the disgusting policies and appointments that are being enacted at the same time. So for now, at least, with the constant caveat that I reserve the right to change my mind when the facts change, I'm not going to ignore anything. Whether or not we talk about it in the second hour and try to unravel, it's been a while since we used the truth serum on the programme, hasn't it? If you could get Donald Trump and his closest confidants into the room and you could administer a truth serum, crucially, they have to be compelled to tell the truth. And you said, what is this designed to do? What do you think they would say? But of course, you need a better understanding of this hideous, weird film. I think, and I haven't watched it completely because I want to do it live on air and try and provide you with some sort of commentary. I think there are some bearded belly dancers. So quite where that plays into the anti-woke, anti-everything agenda, only time will tell. But we will have a look later. 6 minutes after 10 is the time. But I think I need to begin with an apology. Not you, Keith. I think I need to begin with an apology. Not for my absolute monstering of Copernican astronomy yesterday, in yesterday's introduction. Not a lot of phone-in shows, are there, where you turn on and hear the host apologising for his complete misrepresentation of Copernican astronomy at the top of the previous day's show. And by the way, that's not me boasting. That's me recoiling in embarrassment. So I got it completely wrong. He didn't invent the telescope or even discover it. He did the astronomy without the benefit of a telescope that Galileo then came along with a telescope and kind of absolutely confirmed beyond any reasonable doubt. So my apologies for that, but that's not the apology I'm beginning the show with today. I have got a horrible feeling that when we were discussing the necessity of military aid, earlier this week or at the end of last week, or increased spending on the military budget on the day that we tried to work out what was going on in the army, I've got a horrible feeling I gave the full hairdryer treatment to someone who texted in and said, let's take the money from foreign aid. I think I may even have reached for the scissors line. You remember the scissors line? Someone sends me something I consider to be stupid. I put them in idiot's corner and tell them to stay away from scissors. And then, of course, the Prime Minister comes out and increases defence spending by cutting foreign aid. So, very briefly, in fact, I'll take it till 10 past 10 this morning. Keith, set the clock. I'm putting myself in idiot's corner this morning for dismissing that in such an arrogant and unpleasant fashion. And that's a genuine apology, by the way, because if you had stopped to think about things, the shift from soft power to hard power would have made an awful lot of sense. A quick defence, am I allowed a few words of defence? The reason why I am relatively dismissive of that suggestion in almost all other contexts is because it is a tiny proportion of our budget that polling shows almost everybody believes to be much, much higher, largely because of the effort that hideous organisations like the Daily Mail put into trying to persuade you that the Ethiopian Spice Girls are a force for evil and wrongness, and all the other, we're giving mobile phones to people I think Elon Musk did it last week, didn't he, with condoms in Gaza, which was not even Gaza. It was a province called Gaza in an entirely different country where they're trying to cut the spread of HIV. But the facts never got in the way of the feelings when it came to foreign aid. So whenever people said, we could pay for it by cutting foreign aid, it was a bit like when my kids were young and sometimes they'd spend their birthday money and then ask if they could spend it again. I hadn't quite grasped the concept of cash at that point, and so it is with lazy right-wing rhetoric regarding foreign aid. But even a stopped clock is right twice a day. And albeit that it's a relatively tiny proportion of our national expenditure, it is a big enough proportion of our national expenditure to have a little bit sliced off the top and pushed instead into the defence budget, into the military budget. And I'm interested, as always, in what this actually means. And I don't know that you can answer that question without having a slightly better understanding of what the difference is between hard power and soft power. We're fairly clear on what hard power is. Hard power, in its simplest terms, is guns and troops, or planes and flyers, or boats and sailors. It is the bodies and the... I never know if ordnance is the right word to use, and I often say it wrong as well. God, I'm very Catholic with a big C this morning, aren't I? It's almost in hair shirt territory. I'm apologising for everything. But ordnance is one of those words I know I often get wrong, and I may have just got it wrong again. What's a less pretentious word than ordnance for describing the stuff that you spend military budgets on that isn't actually the wages of the military? I can't just say, guys, is there another better word? I don't know. But I know what hard power is. Hard power is bodies and... I nearly said bangs. Does bangs work? Bangs doesn't work. Bodies and equipment. It's a boat equipment. But yeah, right, stop it. You understand, okay? You understand. 10 minutes after 10 is the time. So I know what hard power is. And I know that the decision by Sir Keir Starmer to move money from foreign aid to military spending will not be unpopular. You will find, of course, you will find people who work for agencies or people who are deeply committed to the relative causes. I know that they will be very upset, and I mean, rightly so. It's a bit like Elon Musk taking money away from the poorest children on the planet in order to further enrich the richest adults, which is kind of what's happened with foreign aid cuts in the United States. But the notion of soft power is one that we've never explored together before. My friend Nick suggests the words materiel with an E, which I hadn't come across before. It's even got an accent over the first E, so it's materiel. Materiel? Materiel. Do you know that word? What are you nodding for? You've never heard that word before. Have you? Really? No. It's 12 minutes after 10. So it's personnel and materiel. That's hard power, right? What's soft power? 0345 6060 973. What is soft power? I would like you to tell me. I really would. And I don't know who's going to be best qualified to contribute to this. And so I'm going to suggest everybody is. I don't know why that hideous Daily Mail campaign about the Ethiopian Spice Girls hit so hard with me, because I think because I probably fell for it a bit at the time, and then I looked into it and I couldn't believe the scale of the misrepresentation, because it worked so well. Guy, you're struggling to pay your mortgage this month, aren't you? And do you know what they're doing? Do you know what the British government is doing? It's giving millions of pounds to the Ethiopian Spice Girls. If it says giving millions of pounds designed to cut the likelihood of HIV spreading, cut the likelihood of people becoming refugees, cut the likelihood of domestic violence, forced marriage, all of these things that we consider to be our moral mission in the term of Western values. What is soft power and foreign aid if not an attempt to spread Western values, which we consider to be the best in the world? Remember, Kemi Badenoch has told you that some cultures are better than others. So what do you do if you're lucky enough to be a member of the best cultures? Well, you become a missionary and you try to improve the lot of the people unlucky enough to live under the poorer cultures. That's what I would have thought that's what you do. I suppose you could just build a wall instead. That's an interesting phrase. It sounds strangely familiar. So you've got this concept of soft power and a slight lack, perhaps, of what it actually is. So let's have a little listen to the Defence Secretary, John Healy. He's having quite a good, I don't want to say he's having a good war. I always find that phrase a little bit grim, actually. It's an accepted phrase, but he's having a good run, isn't he, I think, John Healy? Seems to be one of the best performers in Keir Starmer's cabinet. And here he is, just a little clip of what we're talking about in a conversation he had on the breakfast show this morning.
That switch of over £6 billion in 2 years' time from the aid budget to the defence budget is recognising that this is a world in which hard power is more necessary than soft power now.
Hard power is more necessary than soft power now. So I've got two questions for you. The first is he right? Is hard power? I mean, is it either or? I know it's a very, very small club, but I would pay a little bit more income tax to improve military spending. As someone suggested earlier in the week, it's amazing how quickly the news moves at the moment. Events, dear boy, events. Someone suggested earlier this week that most of us probably would. I don't think that's true. I think the historical problem is persuading people who don't feel under threat to pay more money to fight threats. But personally, I think I would. I've always had a strange soft spot for the military, and perhaps it's not that strange after all. But that's not going to land. Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have committed themselves to no tax rises, so they can't raise the money from taxation. Very hard to see when you look at the pie chart on the HMRC website. When you look at the pie chart of where our money goes, that one of the smallest slices is foreign aid. But that's where they've taken it from. Politically, if they'd announced that they were taking it from anywhere else, one of the bigger slices, pensions, NHS, welfare, maybe welfare. I wouldn't be surprised if Kemi, I think she probably already has, started claiming we could take it from the welfare budget without actually explaining how or who. But foreign aid's easy. Out of sight, out of mind. Is it true that now is a time for prioritising hard power over soft power? 0345 6060973. And more importantly, and I think more easily answered, what do you understand soft power to be? If you've worked in the charity sector, if you've done any overseas, either volunteering or paid work, NGOs, charity, what is soft power? And how important is it? 0345 6060 973. Don't hold back on this one by thinking, he'll already know this. I want everything. Because it is one of those phrases that has suddenly become ubiquitous without anybody actually stopping to tell us what it means. So there is an element of not needing to tell us what it means because we have an idea, but we don't have knowledge. We don't have full knowledge. We don't have examples. We don't have detail. We don't have proper evidence of what it actually is and what we might be sacrificing at the altar of necessary increases in military spending. What to you does soft power mean, and have you ever seen it in action? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
This is a perfect distillation of what I was trying to do this morning from Ben in London. The quote from James Mattis while he was the US Secretary of State for Defence comes to mind. He apparently said, if you don't fund the State Department fully, and the State Department would have responsibility for what we call foreign aid, then I need to buy more ammunition ultimately. Just explain that to me, will you? 03456060973. And as I release myself from Idiot's Corner, happily, Louis has volunteered to go in. He's sent a text saying, man who makes career saying Britain is small and insignificant since Brexit. Fact check, not true, but you crack on. Now laments loss of foreign aid as it promotes soft power. Are we tiny and insignificant or a world leader? Make your mind up. Happy to help, Louis. We are, in every measurable way, smaller and less significant as a consequence of Brexit, except potentially in the context of foreign aid, which is something that our government is free to continue to spend whatever sum it wants on. So we've now decided to reduce our importance and our impact in that context as well. So there's no mind to make up. There are facts and then there are feelings. And the facts don't care about your feelings. But don't worry, I've left the heating on in Idiot's Corner, so you'll be all right. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. Bulama is in Lambeth. This is your field of expertise. What do I do now? Do I turn the microphone off, put my feet up and pour myself a cup of tea?
No, James, that's piling pressure on me, but very nice to speak to you again.
Likewise. So where are we?
Yeah, James, I think the first thing to say is that it's a false choice because, I mean, you have an English proverb that you always use the stick and carrot.
Yes.
And using soft power and hard power, they go together. And in the West, in Europe, you can use hard power, military power, increase in defense spending to protect the UK from Russia and maybe other enemies. But the only way you protect the UK's interests and promote UK values in the Middle East, in Africa, is through soft power. You don't deploy American servicemen there. You don't deploy, military equipment there. So what you do is to establish stronger relationships with the governments and especially with the people. And I am a good example of soft power because growing up in northern Nigeria, the first thing you get introduced to in terms of media is the BBC local service, local language service,
yes,
which introduces news and concepts and arguments through a Western lens, and then that helps you promote the Western understanding of things. It helps you to promote things like the English Premier League, which is the most popular in West Africa or even in Africa generally, and just promote Western interests and Western values. And I think.
And why is that to our benefit? I'm going to be the devil's advocate here. Some of the questions I ask you, I might have my own answers to. But if I was listening to this, the fellow who we've just popped into Idiot's Corner, we are no longer an empire. We are no longer the player on the world stage that we used to be. Why is this our concern? The BBC perhaps notwithstanding. Why on earth should the tax pounds of somebody in Blackpool be spent on looking after or providing anything at all to somebody in Nigeria?
Yeah, so it's not completely aid. I mean, we call it aid, but there are benefits to the UK. For example, you do have UK companies operating in Nigeria, oil companies, for example, and other companies, a lot of whose profit comes back to the UK. And when you have people and governments that are friendly to the UK, or UK's values, then you will have your own companies operating in those countries, and then you can reap the profit. For example, over the last 2 years, 3 Sahelian countries, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, turned to the military, and in 2 of the countries, the military took over a few months after they have been trained in Russia.
So there's a little bit of
immediately.
Carry on.
They kicked out French companies, they kicked out the Americans, they kicked out the governments, and also started then to clamp down on Western companies in those countries and started giving preference to Russia. And that's happening in 3 Sahelian countries right now, and there are moves right now in places like Senegal, like Chad, to expel the French. And this will happen to the UK in places where UK has more interest. For example, China is right now investing heavily in Africa's telecommunication and rail and road. And what that means is they can exploit data from African countries. They can, control other things on the continent. And the last thing I would mention on this question James, in addition to commercial interests, is diplomatic weight in the international scene. We saw last 2 years when 15 African countries either abstained or voted in favor of Russia, and that was record-breaking at the time when Russia invaded Ukraine. And then we saw 17 countries, and now the U.S. is voting with Russia, like you discussed 2 days ago.
Yes.
And now that will give more license to other countries to side with Russia and with China against the West at the international community, especially in the United Nations and other international platforms where important discussions are going on.
Two thoughts. The first a little odd, perhaps, which is given that the current US administration votes with Russia now, there's not much point worrying about the much less influential African nations.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that for now, but the problem is that if you have, let's say, 150 countries voting,
yes.
Russia has one vote, the US has one vote. And if you have 15 African countries voting with you, unless it is in the Security Council, then the majority carries the votes, because it's not like a weighted vote where the US or Russia has more. But the point is that if you have this being, for example, what Trump is doing, perhaps the only other country that may then now claim the high moral ground in terms of Western values and interests would be the UK. And if you are then taking aid away, and it's not just aid, remember that this aid budget goes to diplomacy, it goes to culture, it goes to media, then it goes to promotion of Western
so there's so much. It's such a huge umbrella, isn't it? And I mean, if we were dealing with the more mercantile critics of foreign aid, you'd be able to point out in many ways a lot of it involves speculating to accumulate. As you've talked about commercial opportunity and commercial interests, that would be why Russia would be interested in sponsoring regime change so that it can pile in and help itself to the resources and the minerals, which, of course, a lot of people listening are now going to be hearing echoes of Donald Trump's rhetoric with regard to Ukraine and even Greenland. So soft power provides defences against military actions that may end up having enormous economic costs for the UK or more broadly the West.
Yeah, exactly, James. And so when you have this happening at a time when the UK and the US and other Western countries were already receding from Africa and the Middle East, and other actors who are seen as the enemies stepping up, then you would worry. And to be honest, for example, in Kano, when I started studying for my degree, the most conspicuous place or thing you would see close to the Emir of Kano's palace is British Council, which has the British flag. They learn British literature, and that introduces you to British literature, British politics, British way of thinking. And there is no way on earth you would say that's not important, because if it is not important, then you wouldn't see Russia, for example, now strengthening Russia today, or other countries trying to do their media on the continent. I do think this is a big mistake.
Hang on, I'll get you onto that in a minute. I just want to point out that that bit of your analysis somewhat spikes the guns of criticism from the left when they talk about colonialism and things like that, because it's not a question of removing Western influence and Western investment in order to allow these countries to, quote, stand on their own 2 feet. It's a question of replacing partnership with the West with partnership with Russia or China.
Yeah, and then also
which is obviously against our interests.
Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates to occupy places where they previously would not. And Russia
creating refugees, creating carnage, creating terrorist and sponsorships.
And James, this is happening at a time that is already difficult, because Russia and China are malign actors. They use conspiracy, they spread conspiracy and disinformation on the continent. They use regime support packages. When I was at the Tony Blair Institute 3 years ago, we wrote a paper, which is still on the Tony Blair Institute's website, analyzing Russia's efforts on the African continent. And we looked at soft power, we looked at education, we looked at their regime support package, which is helping African dictators. And when you have those kinds of dictators supported by Russia, then British companies have no chance, and therefore British commercial interests on the continent will be impacted.
But what about the ratio between carrot and stick? I register that you think this is a mistake, and I have a much better understanding of why than I did before you started talking. But there is a reprioritization in place here. I mean, it is a consequence of what Donald Trump has said and done, that the UK government has concluded it needs to spend more money on defence spending, and the simple calculation that is the place we're going to get it from can be regrettable and suboptimal, but also inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, the shame, James, recently is that government no longer see themselves as the institutions that should be trying to articulate their points in order to sway public opinion in their favor. For example, when the anti-migrant rhetoric starts, instead of the Labour government to argue on the importance of migration and the real benefits it will bring both commercially and socially to the UK, it starts to then pander to Reform and Kemi Badenoch's Conservative Party. And that's what is happening here. It's important to increase defense spending, but the way you do that is to explain the importance, articulate the importance of this increase, and try to get the British public to buy into that by perhaps
so chicken and egg. It's so because
more tax.
Yes, except that the context in which this can be relatively uncontroversial and relatively popular is the context you've just nailed, where the liars have prevailed. Whether it's about immigration or whether it's about foreign aid, the media and some politicians have created a false reality in which people think this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, but James, the government has the biggest microphone in the country, and they can try to articulate their own point. But then what's happening here is that,
I don't think they do. I think I'm just going to jump on that because it's one of the very first times I've disagreed with you. I don't think they do have the biggest microphone in the country. I think Rupert Murdoch does.
We could say that, but Rupert Murdoch is looking for content from the government. And to be honest, I feel Keir Starmer is a very articulate person, and if he believed in this thing and he tries to articulate it, people will get it, especially. But then they say, the easiest thing to do is to take something that doesn't go directly to the taxpayer or to the voters, and that's a budget, because all of us are in the UK and we don't know
and the chickens, if and when these chickens come home to roost, it's so far distant, both chronologically and geographically, that the pragmatic rationale for what he's done makes perfect sense. No? Yeah.
And so the point is that if you took aid budget to increase defense budget, what you are doing is to protect UK's immediate interest in Europe better, but open
there
UK.
And it's not necessarily either or.
Wide open.
But the more you accept of it being either or, the less controversial the decision becomes. Thank you. Good Lord, you're good. What are you up to at the moment? How can people find out more about because I always get bombarded every time you come on. It's very bad for my ego. I get bombarded with messages about how brilliant you are and how I should just shut up and listen, which I hope I've done. But how can people find out more about the work that you're doing? Are you still writing your column in Daily Trust?
I mean, I no longer write the column in Daily Trust. Most of the work I do right now, James, is rehabilitating former ISIS fighters in East Africa. And my latest work is...
I just said you were making me feel inadequate.
Yeah, we do have a rehabilitation center in Kampala, which I help oversee. And I will be traveling there in about 2 weeks. We just received about 46 new ISIS defectors in East Africa, and working to rehabilitate them psychologically, ideologically, and try to teach them some skills and then give them some capital to earn a livelihood back home. I mean, most of them are low-profile fighters, teenagers who have been either tricked or abducted into the group and profiled by governments before they came to us. So my most recent thing is working on a paper explaining that, and hopefully it will be published recently. And
well, keep us posted. And of course, I don't think I need to point out that the work you've just described would be largely funded and subsidised by what we call foreign aid.
Yeah, I mean, not particularly my own, but I know others do. I mean, I work for a private charity, so there is this. It's a capital management firm that gives us 50% of their profit to do this work. It's an American capital management firm called Bridgeway Capital Management. And when the guy started, he then set up a charity arm called Bridgeway Foundation, and they give us 50% of their profit to do this work. So We have never taken anything from the UK government or Europe at all. We use our own money to do the work.
Long may that continue. As commercially speaking, he's swimming against the Elon Musk tide, isn't he? In terms of ideology and impact. Thank you, and let us know when that paper gets published. I may even understand some of it.
Sure, thank you so much. You are very kind, James. Thank you.
You're brilliant, and you know you are. Bulama Bakati, who has done so much, as you've just gathered, including working at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change and the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, but now actually doing incredibly important work on the ground, the kind of work that you could loosely describe as soft power, albeit that in this case not funded directly by foreign aid. It's 10:35. Thomas Watts has your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:39. It's another subject in a way that sort of makes me feel, I don't know, a little bit not discombobulated, but it's as if that the sort of really lazy rhetoric of 10 years ago on radio phone-in programs or in newspaper columns is now in charge. You know, when Priti Patel axed foreign aid because the Daily Mail had persuaded her that a scheme in Ethiopia dedicated to reducing domestic violence and forced marriage, HIV and unwanted pregnancies was actually just some sort of impresario project designed to create an alternative Spice Girls. You sort of thought, how hard can it be for you to find out the facts? But we're living in an era where politicians increasingly pander to people who can't be bothered to find out. Well, that's not true. We're living in an area, and this reminds me, Kemi Badenoch is up for PMQs later. Politicians can't be bothered to find out the facts because they're so addicted to the feelings. You know, pronouns and virtue signalling. There's a bloody war on. And we are coming ever closer to getting involved in it. But yeah, you talk to me about virtue signalling and strict teachers or whatever it is this week that she's got her teeth into. So it's as if the politicians have become the people who don't really care about finding out the facts. They care only in stoking the feelings. And what social media has done, on Twitter especially since Elon Musk bought it, is create like a furnace where the facts just get immolated. The facts get burnt, and all that remains is they're burning flames of feeling and opinion. It's quite remarkable. And I think, you know, against that backdrop, Bulama's brilliant testimony notwithstanding, against that backdrop, Starmer's not going to suffer. He's not going to lose a single scintilla of political capital as a consequence of this decision. You can agree with 52% of it, which is the decision to increase military spending, and have qualms about the 48% of it, which is the decision to take the money away from foreign aid. But it's not one that's going to get anybody manning the barricades. And if Bulama has introduced us to anything, it's the idea that we won't ever really be able to count the real cost because the roots of a problem at some unspecified point in the future will be too hard to see. No one will be able to see, oh yes, you see that poor soul over there trying to cross the channel in a dinghy. That is a direct consequence of cuts to schemes in their home country that were designed to help them and provide context in which they wouldn't want to flee. You've got, I think there's a story around today, appropriately enough, about Rwanda and aid to Rwanda being cut or calls for it to be cut and stopped because of the support they're currently offering to a rogue regime. Well, it's a good job that no British government ever thought about hopping into bed with that administration or indeed giving them hundreds of millions of pounds. 10:41 is the time. Nick is in Gibraltar. Nick, what would you like to say?
Yeah, morning, James. It's on the issue of soft power and the difference with hard power.
Yes.
I've always thought that soft power is about influence and persuasion, using knowledge of culture and values, etc.
But that sounds like quite a good thing.
I think it is. Hard power is about imposing your will, using pressure to get people to do what you want. And hard power, we know this, can include military sanctions, threats. But both of them need to be targeted, and both have a role, and both have a time.
Yes.
And on soft power, you don't need a lot of money to do a lot of good. You know, you're targeted in the right area, in the right ways, and cutting the waste. And, you know, I think this is the big difference as well between UK foreign policy and American foreign policy, where the UK, I think, has always looked to influence rather than impose, which I think is where the US is been for quite a while.
Yes. You know of what you speak, Eleanor tells me. You've been the deputy, you were the High Commissioner in Botswana. So Nick Pyle, OBE, MBE, to give you your full ticket.
All right.
What can you give me an example of it being in action? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a learning lesson. I was in Afghanistan in the 80s when the Russians were being kicked by the Mujahideen. And I ended up getting arrested and taken into military headquarters. All okay, nothing was going to happen. And I saw one of our local Afghan people who worked in the embassy who clearly didn't want me to see him in Russian military headquarters.
Oh, wow.
And I waved at him and said, Ahmed, come over. And I was young and naive. He came over, pointing his finger at me. And his words were, what makes you think we want your Western-style democracy? And I thought long and hard about that, thinking, well, everybody wants it. It's the best thing since sliced bread. Yeah. And it dawned on me that not everybody wants what we believe they want. So we've got to engage with people. And there's a wider point on this. Engagement doesn't mean endorsement. So just because we talk to bad people doesn't mean we endorse what they think, but you have to engage with them.
Hearts and minds, you're describing, as opposed to imposing democracy, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely right. We jumped forward, and I spent 7 years working on Somalia, where I was engaging with, in the views of the US in particular, Somali bad guys, Islamists in dodgy bars in Nairobi and in Camden.
Wow.
And not there are many dodgy bars in Camden, by the way. Yeah. And then, under pressure from the US to sort of change direction, I wouldn't. British government agreed that this was the way forward. We had to engage. And then with the UN, a peace process started that endured. And it was the first time that the Somalis themselves elected a government, which included the people that some people tried to stop me seeing and speaking to.
And I mean, in terms of the broad sweep of recent history, that this is the... I didn't fully understand your original point, but I do now. This is the alternative to just replacing one leader with one you like, which is more akin to what the United States has done historically in these kind of contexts. Correct. Oh, wow.
Correct.
That's interesting.
Correct.
What then to today then, Nick, and this reordering of priorities, which to me, Bulama's brilliant contributions notwithstanding, the reordering of priorities John Healy has described is at least plausible.
I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah,
it's the circumstances in the moment. The point of I think it was Boris Johnson that closed down DFID and merged it with the Foreign Office. Yeah. There's a real point behind that. Foreign policy is normally in the UK national interest. You only act in your national interests. Of course, it's in our national interest to help rebuild Somalia, stop the piracy, stop the bad guys coming to the UK, etc. And one of the tools you have at your disposal for foreign policy is a development budget. And I think those that used to try and say development aid cannot be linked to policy or foreign policy are naive. It has to be.
So this is an example of Boris Johnson getting something right, probably for the wrong reasons, but credit where it's due.
Yes.
There's a line before you go, and thank you for ringing in. We need to talk about Gibraltar, don't we, at some point, but not today. There's a line in Che Guevara's diaries when early on in the Cuban War, he had to decide whether to take medical equipment or a gun with him when he and his group were forced to retreat from an ambush. And he concluded later that he should have taken the gun. That feels a little bit relevant today.
Yeah.
Nick Pyle, thank you very much indeed. 10:46 is the time. I suspect Jamie in London's text applies to the second caller today as well as to the first. He writes, I was going to send a message earlier, but then I heard Bulama and I decided to just shut up and listen. You and me both. It's 10:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
49. Pragmatic or pragmatism is one of those words that really cuts both ways, doesn't it? It can be both a compliment and an insult. It can seem both good and bad. This is a great text. Of course, soft power is important, but defence money has to come from somewhere, and it's the easiest budget to cut. That's pragmatism. It's the easiest budget to cut. The other alternative is higher taxes. And clearly, although everyone is a patriot and loves this country, paying to protect or asking them to pay to protect it is an outrage far beyond the threat of Putin. And it's a point taken up by Romy, who puts it very winningly. Most of what foreign aid does is crucial. Some is less crucial than the consequences of Ukraine falling to Russia. That is simply true. Defeat would leave so many more millions in dire straits around the world as long as the critical programs are kept. And that marries the two strands of thought that we've explored already today. Two things can be true at the same time. Foreign aid is really good and really important. It is currently the right thing to do to move some money from that budget to this budget. Hopefully. Steve's in Burgess Hill. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James. Thank you for bringing up the topic. Nice to speak to you again.
You're welcome.
Following two very good callers before, so I'll try and take the topic forward. And you asked about the soft power and the hard power, and where they interact. And my perspective, my professional work, they absolutely interlock with one another. So they work in tandem. Is the answer to that. So if our foreign aid money goes out and it solves some of the immediate issues like an emergency aid, health, water, that type of stuff, and our long-term development money, which also goes out to these programs, looks at the long-term issues and deals with them, so education, social, things like that. The only way we can back that up is by having hard power on our side as well. And the interposition with that is something insofar as like security sector reform. So Bilama, very nicely mentioned East Africa, and that's the example I'd like to take forward as well. So we know that the British FCDO funding goes to a lot of East African programs. Similarly, the British military work in Kenya and Somalia in training teams, developing the local security forces. And this is where the interaction is very much interlocked, as I say.
Yes.
Because we simply cannot just have one without the other. So if the security needs to be in place, like in Somalia, in order to have the health programs and the education and the emergency stuff, then the Somali security forces need to be at a level to be able to manage that with the threat of Al-Shabaab, for example.
So go on, carry on, sorry.
And the way we do that is that we strengthen the national forces, and this is where the military steps in and does a very soft-powered sort of transition by training teams. And they build the capacity of the indigenous forces so they can deal with it themselves. And the only way for us to do that is to have a power that's able to project across into conflict zones and be able to stabilize with the threat of hard power, and also the ability to transform some of this into a soft form, into a national military for another country.
That's brilliantly put. What's I presume, like everyone today except me, you're qualified to contribute to this conversation.
Yes, I spent 20 odd years in the British military, in the army,
right.
and now 10 years within the humanitarian development sector.
And that is a natural progression. I understand why that's a natural progression, having listened to your explanation of what these two phenomena provide, what they do. So, I mean, the devil, as ever, will be in the detail. Some of the stuff you describe, to lose it, to not have it, would be disastrous. But equally, as that text I read out a moment ago, that Blue Sky post I read out a moment ago makes clear, the sum of what foreign aid does is less crucial than the consequences of Ukraine falling to Russia. So you can wear both your hats on that front.
No, absolutely, yeah. And the examples that's been given already this morning from your two previous callers, the very essence of it, they're symbiotic in nature. One does benefit from the other in some way or other. Well, a lot of it is very intangible, so it's very difficult to pinpoint and precisely see this. What the consequence we're seeing of now is because we didn't spend that or do that before. And the converse of that. So the benefit of seeing something now is because we put the money in 10 years ago in this particular part of the country and around the world in a conflict zone. So it's very difficult to join these things up in an easy to understand way.
Well, you've done a pretty good job, and I'm grateful to you for it. And of course, I'm reminded throughout this hour of the absence of an antidote to the tabloid rhetoric that has created public perceptions of foreign aid, or while it was going on. I mean, I'm not going to say it's too late now, because I think that this decision probably is the right one. But the rationales being offered up today do not justify, for example, when Rishi Sunak cut it from 0.7 to 0.5 without providing the sort of urgent context that Donald Trump's comments about and behaviour towards Ukraine have created. Thank you, Steve. Gosh, Paul's in. It feels like I've been doing university work today. I was just sort of sitting in a lecture hall. It's fantastic, isn't it? Paul's in Canterbury. Paul, what would you like to say?
Well, I was going to say, first of all, that first guy you had on, I mean, he articulated so much of what I was thinking. In a way that really, I mean, I was just like, well, I'd love to break bread with a guy, seriously, because I left school with two O levels and never went on to higher education, but I always was current affairs and history was always two of my main things. And I'm looking at it, particularly because I've covered the other things, of saying we're not, that this government's hidebound itself, I think, and I'm an instinctive Labour supporter,
right,
to say, you've got to turn around and say, circumstances have changed. We are going to have to look at ways of raising taxes to cover both, because, if we don't do this, then it's going to cost us more on the military side eventually. And
that's the sort of the speculate to accumulate in non-financial terms. We spend this money now because it will save us a fortune in the long run. That's true of all difficult government decisions, short-termism versus long-termism. But you don't address, and I don't think anyone really can, the perhaps regrettable to you and to me, but inarguable truth of foreign aid being the easiest budget to cut.
But it might seem to be low-hanging fruit, James. And, of course, especially with, papers like the Daily Mail, etc., and the way they do their misrepresentation, it's like, we've got to worry about what the...
But also in a more generous reading of it, also in the context of the average voter being more interested in his and her own life and experience and country than in anybody else's. So that's why it is inarguably the easiest budget to cut. There's a moral dimension to it that doesn't address. It might be morally the worst thing to do, but in terms of politically, it's the easiest thing to do.
I can understand the sentiment. I mean, just to give you a bit of context, I'm 66, almost 67.
Clickety click.
My parents were both born by 1920.
Right.
So my dad and all but one of my uncles served from 39 to 45 or 46. So I've got that reach on history and an understanding of what was, when they were, particularly mum and dad were still alive, they would talk about certain things, and it's like, you say, and I'm thinking, I'm looking and going, it seems to be the 1930s all over again. And that worries me. And it
worries me too. We might move into this territory in the next hour. You're right, actually. Short-termism and accommodation stroke appeasement, let alone alignment. Paul, thank you. That was the perfect end to a really powerful hour. And you played it as big of a, despite mentioning your self-described lack of educational credentials at the beginning, you played as big and as an important a part in that conversation as everybody else did, except me. I'll be the MC if you like. I'm not putting this texter in Idiot's Corner because in many ways it distills the entire elements of the entire discussion. We should be cutting all foreign aid and using the money to protect our borders. Stop the boats, writes Nigel in Clacton. In Clacton, pull the other one. Writes an anonymous texter, but the point there, of course, is that you're never going to have a zero-sum game. But the more you spend overseas, the more you invest, the harder you work, the more that you do, and the better that you do it. No one can pretend that there's no waste or excess or mistakes or errors. But the more that you do that, the fewer boats there would be. That's, the elephant in the room of your professed logic. Is that if you want to stop the boats, you need to stop people getting into them on the other side of the water. Is that the sound of a penny dropping, or is that the sign of a skull too thick even to understand something as simple as that? Foreign aid stops them getting into boats or setting off for the seashore.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I wish you could have just heard the conversation we were having. It was literally saying things like, shall I just play it on my phone really close to the microphone and then I can pause it? Because we lack the technological capability. And this is probably my fault, is it, Keith? Because we should have had this conversation sooner. But what I want to do now is play you this extraordinary, and I know I use that word a lot, but goodness me, I need a bigger word. We're going to need a bigger word. Video that Donald Trump has posted, which I cannot describe to you without describing it to you, if you see what I mean. I can't show it to you necessarily, depending on where you are, although you can find it on the lbc.co.uk webpage and indeed all over social media, including on my Blue Sky account at Mr. James OB. But I can't just let it play because you'll only hear the sound, and I can't do a running commentary because I wouldn't be quick enough. I'd have to pause it to describe scenes that are there. And if you think I'm confused, listen to what the producer just wrote on my screen. She wrote, "If I'm honest, James, I don't know what's going to happen here. Following that initial play, I don't think any of us currently know what each other wants." And that's before Keith Six is all in. So what are we actually going to do? I don't think I'll play it on my phone next to the microphone because that offends Keith's audio engineering sensibilities on a level that I find impossible to comprehend. Am I right? Okay. I don't think I'll play it. I'll let you hear the audio without any pause. It's only 33 seconds long. So you'll hear it in the highest quality we can establish. And then I will watch it in real time in the studio and try to describe it to you, but using pause, because otherwise we would never be able to fully articulate the sheer horror and absurdity of what I am watching. So I'm going to pause on my device and then describe to you the last second or two that I've just watched. But you are about to hear the soundtrack to an AI-generated film depicting in broad terms, and I don't think we need to worry about spoilers, the transformation of an obliterated Gaza Strip into a Donald Trump-owned beach resort. This happened again. Until I say it out loud, I haven't fully registered what I'm looking at. It's such a strange cycle. It must just be because of the job that I do. Until I say it out loud, I'm going to play you the soundtrack to a film that the President of the United States has posted and shared and presumably commissioned, which shows the putative transformation of the largest prison camp in the world reduced to rubble by, as you know, a military bombardment of unprecedented severity and, in my opinion, inhumanity, being transformed without any mention of what happens to the people currently living there or dispossessed or homeless, let alone dead and hideously injured, to be transformed into a beach resort owned by the current President of the United States of America. And 15 seconds in, as many of you have identified, there's a clip of such unutterable idiocy in the context of what Donald Trump supposedly stands for that you won't believe me when we get there, and I tell you. But everything I tell you will be true. Okay? So, first of all, have a listen. You're quite right. I think I might be in the process of inventing Gogglebox Radio. Am I in the process of inventing Gogglebox Radio? Have we ever done anything like this before? But desperate times call for desperate measures. Here's the soundtrack.
Donald is coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here. Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new life. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza, number one. Trump Gaza, shining bright. Golden future, a brand new light. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza, number one.
Okay, I wish this was satire. I wish it was parody. I wish we could ignore it, as one or two people have suggested in the last few days, that we can stop being distracted. You don't have to be distracted. You can describe the appalling policies that are being enacted. You can describe the abandonment of Ukraine. You can describe the sycophantic attitude towards Vladimir Putin, the United Nations resolutions, the vote that the United States cast with Vladimir Putin's Russia. Yesterday's comment that he will welcome oligarchs, Russian oligarchs who've robbed their own country blind into the United States of America if they pay enough money. All of that you can do, but you can't ignore something like this. So the opening scene is a child crouched in the rubble of what purports to be Gaza, although I think there's probably too many buildings still standing for it to be a proper representation of what has happened to much of that territory. There's an adult to the right of the child attempting to either comfort or caution him, and to the left there is a fighter holding a machine gun, and that is how the film opens. And Gaza then appears in big green letters at the top of the screen. It cuts quickly to footage of some women sort of rifling through what look like scraps or soil, presumably in pursuit of food, and then more footage of men walking through this rubble-strewn thoroughfare, obviously designed to represent the aftermath of the Israeli bombardment. There's a child running through the streets, pursued by a fighter in what appears to be sort of quasi-military garb, and then we cut back to the original child, whose hands are being held by two men, one on each side, and the question, what next, appears at the top of the screen. They then walk through a CGI-generated tunnel and come out on a beach that has been created by CGI, but looks, most like a sort of combination of Miami and Dubai, only one of which I have visited. And so the child walks through this tunnel, two children and a woman walk through the tunnel, come out on the other side. This bit looks more like Monte Carlo. So they're now in a palm tree dotted paradise, where extremely expensive cars drive up and down, and very smart looking restaurants and other hospitality sites. We're 10 seconds into a 34-second film, so don't worry, we're not going to be here forever. And then more children come pouring through this tunnel, rushing towards this curious Florida, Dubai mashup. There are markets on the street as well, and there's a picture of a bloke who looks oddly like Elon Musk, like a sort of elongated Elon Musk. Elongated, I don't know, is that his middle name? Like an elongated Elon Musk, appearing to eat what appears to be seafood. I can't quite tell. Maybe it's CGI generated, but something luxurious, no doubt, with a big smile on his face. Oh, delicious. And then you've got perhaps the strangest element of the film, which is some belly dancers doing what belly dancers do, wearing, skirts and bikini tops, or what, I don't know what the technical term is. But and that moment passes very, very quickly. So quickly, in fact, that you have to use pause to identify the fact that they've both got very long beards and breasts. So in Donald Trump's vision of Gaza, human beings with breasts and beards will be dancing all over the place. Make of that what you will. I don't even know where to start on that. And that's on second 16. If you doubt me, you're looking at around 15:50. On we go. Then there's another shot of, I think it might be supposed to represent some sort of minaret, but I wouldn't put my house on it. It could be a sort of attempt to recreate a Disney-style turret or tower. And then we cut to, if you think the bearded belly dancers were weird, we then cut to a child holding a balloon that is a big golden representation of Donald Trump's head. So there's a child standing in the middle of this territory holding a big golden balloon depicting Donald Trump's head. And then a cut to coastline with nice yachts and hotels and real estate. Then a cut to Donald Trump himself in a club of some sort, dancing with a woman wearing similar outfits to the belly dancers, but without a beard. Dancing is probably pushing it. He's just sort of leering at her, really, is the only way I can think to describe it. Then you cut to some more footage of a man dancing on a beach while being showered with money. And then some children on a beach being showered with money. And then a big hotel called Trump Gaza, which deliberately or otherwise looks almost identical to the hotel that Biff Tannen opened in Back to the Future 3. Frame for frame, it could be the same image. And remember, the people that wrote Back to the Future 3 said that they based Biff Tannen's character on Donald Trump, long before he had any political ambitions at all. You won't believe me on that. Fact check me. Go on. Back to the Future 2 it was, I beg your pardon, not the one in the Wild West. The one, there you go, Keith just fact-checked me. See how easy it is? It was the one in the fictional future. So then you've got the Trump Gaza Hotel, essentially him saying one of the things that this mad dream involves is me making lots and lots of money. And that is almost it. Then we cut back to the bloke who looks a bit like an elongated Elon Musk. This time he's eating hummus. Can't quite work out what he's dipping into the hummus. It looks suspiciously hairy, but then again, so did the belly dancers. And another shot of a street. And then, do you remember that enormous statue of Saddam Hussein that was pulled down in the towards the end of the Iraq War? And they kind of pulled down that really massive statue, and the population was celebrating. Well, now imagine a statue that's bigger than that and made of gold and featuring Donald Trump. Got it? Yeah, that's close to the final scene of the film, but there's still a few seconds left. We then cut, and I just need to rewind this because even in the context of what we've just been watching, I can't quite believe my ears. We then cut to a shop in which you can buy golden statuettes of Donald Trump. I tell you what, given how popular he is with Christians of a certain hue and how characters like Nigel Farage bang on about Judeo-Christian culture as a sort of camouflage for something rather more sinister. It's a good job there's nothing in the Bible about worshipping false idols, isn't there? Because that would be really as if they're capable of embarrassment. So now you can buy a little golden idol of the cult leader under the phrase Trump Gaza, and then there's just lots of gold stuff in shot. And then there is that does definitely look like Elon Musk. That can't be an accident. And then there is another shot of the elongated Elon Musk walking through a street while money showers down upon him. And then, remarkably, I mean, because it's unflattering, there is footage of Donald Trump and, is that Netanyahu? And Benjamin Netanyahu on a sunbed. And listen, people in glass houses can't throw stones, but they haven't used much technology to buff up their physiques, I think it's fair to say. It's a curiously sort of up crotch shot of Trump, but he has posted this, and he's drinking what appears to be a large glass of Berocca vitamin supplement, although it may be something else. And they have Trump Gaza behind them, as if that is the hotel that they are staying in on their honeymoon, on their holiday, and that is the final shot. It cuts them back to an archway that you'd be quite familiar to if you've ever been to Morocco or anywhere like that, with Trump Gaza plastered across it in golden letters. And that is, in the context of politics, right? The stuff that we talk about together every day. In the context of politics, that is the maddest thing I have ever seen. I'm not going to criticise anyone. I haven't seen anyone yet, but anybody texting me to say, you've fallen into the trap, I can't believe you're talking about it. You really need to give your head a wobble. If you don't talk about this stuff, people don't know about it. If you don't talk about it, you never get to work it out or understand it or properly dismantle it. I don't know what the answer is to the question I'm about to ask you. And that's why it's so important to ask it. You don't know the answer. I've been told by my crack team, we think it's more Dubai than Morocco. I did say that at the outset, but you mean the arch at the end. Although they add, helpfully, because this is the kind of relationship that we have with each other on this program, we haven't been to Dubai, but we have been on Instagram. So I'm just happy to clear that one up. So here is the question I'm going to ask you. If you had a truth serum, okay, and I think you can forgive me for stepping into slightly surreal realms, given what I've just described to you. Think about this. This is important. If you had a truth serum and you could administer it to either Donald Trump or any of his key advisors, let's presume that he didn't post this independently. He might have done, but for the purposes of my mind game, you have other advisors in the room, and you said, what have you done? Or you said, what are you hoping to achieve? Or you said, why have you done this? Why have you made this? Why have you posted this? Why have you shared this? What would they say? With the truth serum, right? So as in, well, you know what a truth serum does. They have to tell the truth, and you have some magical or medical device that compels them to tell you the truth. 0345 6060 973. Why did you do this? Why did you post it? Why, if you made it, did you make it? And if someone else made it, possibly as parody, and you posted it, what is this supposed to achieve? 0345 6060 973. And you are entitled to tell me that we shouldn't be talking about it, but you have to have your ducks in a row. You have to make a very strong case for why you believe that we are all incapable of both analysing this obscenity and properly chronicling and detailing the more impactful and immediate political decisions and appointments that he has made. Okay? Hit the numbers now. You will get through, because it's not been a normal introduction to a phone-in, has it, by any stretch of the imagination? So, as ever, you are creatures of habit, and that means you haven't been sitting there with your finger poised above redial. So if you hit the numbers now, you will get through. But the question is really straightforward. Give them a truth serum, ask them what they're playing at, and tell me what they'd say. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 20 past 11.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 22 minutes after 11. I love the fact that some people are listening on the catch-up function and forgetting. So my inbox is currently bombarded by being bombarded by people having a crack at answering the question of what on earth this insane. I mean, what word would you? I could almost do a phone-in for the first time ever on what adjective you would use to describe something that you've just witnessed. I don't know. I don't like using insane because it has, connotations in the context of people who are actually poorly. Bonkers, similarly. I don't even know. But someone's obviously listening on catch-up because they just texted military hardware in response to a question that I asked about an hour and 20 minutes ago. But I suppose better late than never. You've heard the description. I want to read something that, because, we can have fun, and that's important. In almost every context, we'll manage to have fun and at least smile at each other and be friendly and be warm. But Andrew takes us down a much darker but absolutely inarguable and essential and urgent avenue when he says there are thousands of murdered civilians lying under that rubble, victims of what he describes as genocide. That's why this should be discussed. And I think there is some truth in that. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. If you could administer a truth serum and ask Trump and his closest allies why they've done this, what they hope to achieve, what would they say? Naz is in Enfield. Naz, what do you think?
I think I was telling your producer that Donald Trump believes whatever he does and says is the right thing. He's
just given out hats. Have you seen the new hats?
Yeah.
Trump is giving people who haven't seen it. He's giving out hats that say Trump was right about everything. The man's is he in his 80s?
Yes,
that's like something a 3-year-old would do.
Yes, but that's what I mean. Whatever he says and does is the right thing, and you're not allowed to question it. So all the people in his cabinet, even they were given truth serums, would say, "Oh, he's doing the right thing," and they're not even thinking of how the people of Gaza would feel. They're just thinking, "Oh, we'll please Israel. We'll take the Gazans, 2.2 million Gazans, out and make it a beautiful Riviera," without thinking about what Andrew said, the death and destruction underneath. And he, whatever he does, he idolizes himself, James.
I did this yesterday. I need to be conscious of not being too strict because these are not easy questions to answer. But you're ringing a different phone in. No, don't say sorry. Crikey, it's my fault. But you're answering questions I've asked a million times before. This is very specifically about this film, about the big balloon and the big golden statue and the mashup of Miami and Dubai. What, for example, might be a positive reaction to it? Normally, you've got a few people queuing up to shout Trump derangement syndrome and say, owning the libs, we love it. How do they greet this? What do they think this is about? Just trolling?
He's just, the video I watched is abhorrent, but so he I think the funniest bit is him and Netanyahu sitting next to each other drinking a glass of beer.
It's not beer. He's a teetotal. It looks like a Barocca. You know those fizzy orange things that you have.
Sorry.
You used to have as a student when you had a hangover.
Oh, I didn't know he was a teetotaler.
Yes, he is. I mean, it's even harder to compute when you find that out. A lot of his behaviour, isn't it?
It is, because I would have thought that some of his, like even making a video like this, would be under the influence. But obviously, I'm wrong. Donald Trump. The truth serum was that he would just say that because that's what he believes, James. All the policies he does, he believes. He just says them, anything. So seeing that video, everything is makes me.
Of course it does. Of course it does. But I think we can both agree neither of us have got a clue what it's actually designed to do. Not in our sort of brain of brain. We had to put the house on it. What on earth would they say? Here's the truth serum. Atik's in Windsor. Atik, what do you reckon?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
Lovely to speak with you again.
Likewise.
I believe this would have been directed by the Israelis. They would have had an input into this. And a lot of what we're seeing is a lot of gold.
There is a heck of a lot of gold in it. That's true.
What does that imply? That land is full of gold. We know that it's full of oil and gas out on the Gaza fields, which is what they've already discovered. They're going to get really, really rich off the back of Gaza, and it's all about.
Well, you're providing a kind of meta analysis of the messages that the film is sending, but I don't know who the messages are being sent to.
To the Palestinians.
What, to rile them up?
Israel, exactly that.
Or to woo them into thinking we could live in this mythical paradise.
No, not woo them. Not woo them, James. You hit the nail on the head. To rile them up. Because actually what you're doing, in essence, is you're telling them that we don't care about the family members, the loved ones underneath that rubble. We're going to turn that rubble into hotels, and I'm going to put my name and my face all over it, and it's going to be mine. So that's going to rile up every Palestinian who is waiting to retrieve their loved ones from the rubble.
So you're never getting it back. A former colleague of mine who is Jewish, I mention that because I think it's pertinent. He has posted a message pointing out that embassies have been burned down for significantly less. So you're not in any way endorsing violence against embassies. You're just recording history and pointing out the response to provocations. And your suggestion today is this is designed in large part as a monstrous provocation.
Exactly that. And it's a provocation by the Israelis so they don't release
know
the prisoners.
Netanyahu is indeed, he's on one of the sun loungers by the pool in Trump Gaza, but we have no idea whether his permission was sought or whether anybody in his administration was involved in creating it. But you're perfectly entitled to your opinion. I'm just reminding everyone that it is your opinion.
Yeah, fine, it's my opinion, but I also like to educate everybody that at the moment the ceasefire deal has been broken by Israel because they haven't released the Palestinian hostages that were supposed to be released. Right? And now those hostages haven't been released by Israel, and at the same time, Donald Trump is releasing this video.
Yeah.
What do you think the Palestinians are going to be feeling today?
Well, I think that's pretty rhetorical. They're going to be feeling profoundly provoked and indeed horrified. And when we go back to that message from Andrew, there are thousands of murdered civilians lying under the rubble, victims of genocide. That's why this should be discussed. And you move it into the realms of provocation and you take into account the fact that, as my former colleague reminds us, embassies have been burned down for significantly less. I think you can very easily arrive at the conclusion that they're trying to incite terrorism. It's 11:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:33. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Since I sort of came off Twitter, I don't get exposed as much as I used to. I'm not suggesting for a minute that I miss it, but I don't get exposed as much as I used to the apologists and because you can't tell the difference between a bot based in St. Petersburg and a genuine apologist for or fan of the increasingly fascistic direction that Donald Trump has gone in, and B, because Twitter, sadly for people like me, became a place where you couldn't see the wood for the trees. You'd just be bombarded with such idiots and ugliness that you couldn't ever find the things that you joined it for in the first place. But it means that I haven't actually seen much evidence, even in my inbox, of what you might call the Trump derangement syndrome brigade. The people who felt that the correct response to an attempted coup upon his own country and painting a target on the back of his own vice president was to somehow turn it into an opportunity to laugh at people who explained why that was awful and why, if you're still on board with Donald Trump after he's done something like that, you're lost forever to even the most basic morality or rule of law. So I don't know what that gang is doing now. Maybe my inbox will produce the goods, but at the moment, I have no idea what you would do if you were an apologist for or a cheerleader for Trump in the UK or in the US, or one of the people who even just a few days ago was saying things like, "Oh, isn't it funny how worked up people get about it?" Yeah. Before he abandoned Ukraine and voted with Russia at the United Nations, people were still doing that. But bizarrely, it's not something I can fully unravel. Exactly the same people in the UK media who told you that Brexit would be a brilliant idea, who spent a lot of their time tickling Boris Johnson's toes, who were foursquare behind austerity, who don't believe that poverty exists unless it's someone claiming that they can no longer afford to send their child to private school, and who greeted Liz Truss's fiscal event with bated breath. They're exactly the same people. You think they'd have learnt now that maybe when they start laughing at everybody else or insulting everybody who's explaining why Brexit wouldn't be a good idea, why austerity wasn't very wise, why Liz Truss wasn't an economic genius, why Boris Johnson couldn't be trusted to run a bath, let alone run a country, and that Donald Trump was depraved. Did you think they'd have gone there? Oh, yeah, do you know what? Maybe we'll listen to them this time because I might get a hat made. They've been right about everything else. But no, there they are, suggesting that Donald Trump is... I don't know what they're doing post-Ukraine, post-UN vote. I don't, as I say, I don't get exposed to it in the way that I used to. But what the hell is this film about? What is it designed to do? Why have they made it? Because at the moment... an epic and hideous provocation is the closest thing to a sensible answer that you'd get if you could administer a truth serum and ask them why they had done it. Mark's in Saffron Walden. Mark, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. How you doing? Thanks for taking my call. Big fan of your work.
You're very kind.
Well, trying to shed some light on this wild video, which feels like possibly one of the most ludicrous parts of the Trump circus, which is a terrifying prospect.
This is when you remember how few days he's been there for, and this is what he's opening with.
Yeah, there's genuine terror, I believe, in how much further this can spiral. So, in answer to the question of what would be the truth, should you apply a truth serum to him or to his team or to his supporters, I think there's a slightly different word which comes to mind depending on who within that MAGA circle you were to give the serum to. My two words that kind of jump to mind are ego, with a little bit of fear, and I'll explain it, and an irreverence. And they're my two words. So I think if you give it to him, I think, as with much of his life, if not all of his life, it comes back to ego. Why has he posted it? Because it feeds his ego. Why is a giant gold statue of him in the desert, regardless of its connotations? His ego. That's what he genuinely would love to see.
But he wouldn't say that.
I think he would. I think he cares so much about his own image that having a giant statue of him...
So this is what the people want?
Yeah.
This is I'm showing them the world they could have if they treated me in the way that I think that they should. The way that my brilliance demands, the big golden statues and weirdly, the little statues for sale in the shop look like he's sitting on the toilet. But I don't think he's watched it that closely because otherwise you wouldn't have the belly dancers who are fully breasted and fully bearded. But so there's something. I mean, that Old Testament thing about worshipping false idols. Go on.
Which is, has he come up with this and posted this entirely by himself? Yes, it's possible because he does post at 3 a.m. from the toilet.
Yes.
But he's also probably been screened by people within his circle. And so the question then is, if you give the serum to them, why have they done it?
Yeah.
And so the word ego comes up again, but from a slightly different perspective. This time it's an ego that I think they have such fear that they don't want to raise a hand against him. They don't want to step out and say, do you know what, this is incredibly inappropriate. We really shouldn't be doing this. Their own careers are on the line. So it's a different type of ego that they want to further their own political career. They're in great jobs working within his circle at the moment, which they don't want to jeopardize by publicly or even privately stepping against him, undermining what it is he wants to do. You know what happens if you criticize him? You're immediately on the chopping block, whoever that is. Even if you're a world leader, you're immediately on the chopping block.
Yeah, but that's why have you gone along with it? They would answer. That it's not what is it designed to achieve, unless we're being really reductivist and saying it is just homage being paid at the altar of cult leader Trump. So he doesn't even see it as parodic or ironic or comical. He genuinely dreams of the day when there's an enormous golden statue of him in the middle of the Gaza Strip.
But I think if you gave that to some of his circle and said, do you think this is a particularly smart thing to post on social media? Truthfully, they'd say no. But God forbid they say that.
No, you've taken my truth serum experiment further than I intended.
Sorry.
Because I really wanted the answer to what the hell do they think they're playing at, as opposed, the ones who would answer honestly, as opposed to the ones who would say, I think it's absolutely ridiculous, but I'm too frightened to say so.
I think the majority probably do think it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I wonder. I wonder. I said yesterday, I don't know how much time we should devote to the sort of psychological unravelings, trying to unravel the psychology of what's going on, and how much you devote to the actual detail of what is going on. So today's another example of that. But brilliant stuff, Mark. Thank you. I look forward to your next call. 11:41 is the time. This is from Dan. I think it's terrible journalism that you only talk to people who agree with your opinion. Mate, you've got some treats coming in. Get yourself on YouTube. Have a look what happens. And also, let me see what else you've texted me. Here we go. Obviously, nobody's supporting this plan. Gaza should be rebuilt and they should just stop launching rockets into the neighbour's country. I don't know what that means, mate. Here we go. This is obviously an over-the-top version of where the Gazans could be living. The issue is the money they received went to building terror tunnels and infrastructure for terrorism. So you can't get medicine into Gaza at the moment, but Dan thinks you could get everything needed to build an enormous golden statue of Donald Trump, some fantastic hotels and several docks for yachts. Mate, please ring in. 11:42 is the time. Kaka is in Birmingham. Kaka, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thank you so much for having me. You know what? There is so much that can be said about this video. I could spend an hour talking about it, but I'm just going to say 3 points about this video.
Hang on, let me remind you what I'm asking. I have just given Donald Trump and his key allies, the ones who think this is a brilliant idea, a truth serum, and I have said, why is this a brilliant idea?
Yeah, about this video, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the first point is not, I know a lot of people what they think is true as well. There is truth to that. But they're not only trying to show this video to the Palestinians, they're trying to show it to the world. That we can come, destroy your country, whatever goods, whatever, if there's anything remaining, even the remains don't come and don't belong to you. Everything belongs to us. We can come and stamp our name on it, make our own idols, put it across the globe. And the reality, one of the facts is, James, that a lot of people, unfortunately, do take these kind of even horrible acts as entertainment. The kind of a video that he's made after all the acts and everything that he's destroyed millions of lives, and he's making entertainment out of it. But we know the reality. A lot of people are going to take that as a laugh. And some people might even joke about this thing. That's one of the main things, that he can do whatever to any country, destroy it, stamp his name on it, sell his idols, and say, this belongs to me, nothing belongs to you.
So why did you do that? Answer, because I can.
Yes, exactly. Wow. I can do that to anyone and anything, and you cannot stop me or say anything about it. Why? Because the reality, James, one other thing, if, like, a lot of people, if they don't know, there are 57 Muslim countries in the world at the moment. He knows not one of them is going to stand up for the Palestinians. He's going to carry on, do whatever they do. Why is he stopping? Some people said recently that he's not going to go ahead or impose the Gaza plan. Not because one country stood up for the Palestinians. No, only because Egypt and Jordan, they didn't stand with him.
Sure.
Not that anyone spoke against him. So he's saying, no one's going to stop me. I can still carry on doing this to your country, Palestine, whatever, and I'm going to do whatever, stamp my name on it. Number two, James, I want to say about this video, that Oh, so, you know what? It was very important. Yes, sorry. Okay. What if this sort of an act that has been done, someone destroyed, called it both of these guys, Trump and Netanyahu, right? They've destroyed the country and made this video. What if an exact same or similar act was done from the other side? Now, say, forgive me for mentioning this, right? But for the horrible act of 9/11, horrible act of 7/7, when that was done, what if, say, quote-unquote, the Muslims or whoever did that act, they came and they made a video from the country and they launched it out? How would the world react? Would they take that as entertainment? And would they say this is just a joke or something?
No, I mean, I mean, you've posited the existence of lots of people taking it as entertainment and saying that it is just a joke. But I haven't come across anyone doing that yet. And you can compare the carnage of 9/11 to the carnage in Gaza, which is, of course, much greater. But you can't. I mean, I think we've gone a little bit too far down speculation to say how would the world... I mean, we know how the world felt when there was footage of people celebrating the 9/11 terror attacks. Yeah, we know exactly how the world responded. So your point stands in the sense that we responded completely differently. But that's reality versus fantasy. This is. What about this? Try this on for size. What if someone else made it as a Mickey take? As a parody,
they would be arrested and taken in.
Let me finish my fantasy island. Someone else made it as a joke to take the Mickey out of Trump, and he doesn't realise. He just saw it on his social media and decided to share it because he thought it was actually bigging him up rather than undermine. It's so out there and so nuts that it could be construed as attacking Trump in the same way it can be construed as aggrandizing Trump.
Yeah, exactly. The both can be taken, and there's going to be half of the world even as well. Some people will take one side, and the other people might take the other side. And you know what? Because of exactly this, James, my point 3 comes in.
Go on.
My third point is a question. Then what is it in the world, quote unquote, the most powerful man in the world, Trump, right now? What is it that he can do that the world will say, no, you cannot do this, and we are going to stop you? Is there anything in the world that this man can do that the world or his own parliament can stop?
We touched on this yesterday.
To ruin his own country?
We touched on this yesterday because a lot of people using Occam's razor subscribe. No, don't say sorry. It's just adding to what you say. A lot of people using Occam's razor think, and it's a popular view, that Vladimir Putin must have some material that's so embarrassing to Trump he has to dance entirely to Vladimir Putin's tune. But I don't think I think that's your point in a nutshell. There's nothing you can have. You could release footage tomorrow of Donald Trump in the most humiliating and appalling of circumstances, whatever it might be. There's all sorts of rumours about tapes that may have been filmed during visits to Russia. It wouldn't affect anything because he's in that space now where he can do whatever he wants. He can even make a hugely embarrassing film of himself.
Yes, exactly, James. You know what? I might not get the opportunity to say this. I just want 5 seconds to say just one last thing. Do you mind? You have to take the next callers. I just want to say thank you for the way you are speaking out, James. Right now, 99% of the international media or the other media are not being able to do it. Even though small portions of you be able to speak out for Palestinians. You're not speaking out for Palestinians. No, you are speaking out for the truth.
Well,
and you are holding on to it, and may God bless you for that, and may God make it easy for you. And thank you. We appreciate that. The world appreciates it.
Well, as you say, I think 99% is a little unfair, but as I've said from the very start of that, from the day really, or shortly after that October the 7th terror attack, I will not feel sorrier over the death of a Israeli child than I do over the death of a Palestinian child, and I will not feel sorrier over the death of an innocent Palestinian than I do over the death of an innocent Israeli. Speaking of innocent Israelis, the family, the poor family who were recently reunited with their bodies after Hamas provided the wrong one in the first instance, have launched some scathing criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu overnight, which, just to drive home Kaka's point, is unlikely to be picked up by much of the UK media. I may tell you a little bit more about it after this. It's 11:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:52. PMQ's around the corner, but I think it's important to provide a little bit more detail of that story I alluded to a moment ago. Ofri Bibas is the sister of the released hostage Yarden Bibas. You will know that Yarden's wife Shiri and their young sons Ariel and Kafir were murdered in captivity by Hamas. and she has slammed Benjamin Netanyahu and told him to shut up because he has gone against the express wishes of the family when repeatedly describing the murders of Yarden's wife and sons. She's also gone after Israeli news outlets, social media users and public diplomats for what she describes as a blatant violation of the wishes of the family. Times like this, to avoid some of the predictable criticism I sometimes get from all corners, I turn to the Times of Israel for the coverage of this story, and they write that publishing such information over the family's repeated requests was an abuse for its own sake of a family that has gone through 16 months of hell and still has the worst ahead. She wrote this on the day before her the funeral of her nephews and sister-in-law. He has continually described the young boy's murder in graphic detail, did so in a speech in front of the America-Israel Public Action Committee on Tuesday, held up a picture of the victims at a military ceremony on Sunday, which has caused the family to send, I kid you not, a cease and desist letter to their own Prime Minister and other government officials asking them to just stop publishing all the details of these murders. And again, I don't know whether you're going to see that anywhere else in the UK media, but you're going to hear it here. Liam's in Bolton. Liam, what would you like to say? Steer us back to the truth serum.
Hi, James. So, if you give Donald Trump a truth serum, I earnestly believe he does not see himself as a president. He has never seen himself just as a president. He believes he is an emperor, or at the very least he wants to be an emperor, and part of that means that he wants an empire. If you watch that video, if you listen to the I don't remember if you mentioned the actual the sound that was playing.
I played the sound, and then I did the film. I did it perfect. I invented Gogglebox on the radio.
So, I mean, the first line, Trump will set you free, this whole idea that he wants to build an empire for himself in his own image. And I don't believe, earnestly, that he is looking at this as something that's being controversial. I think he looks at Gaza as just being another part of his Trump empire. If you look at, for example, his, I think they call it Trump Heights, there was a whole settlement in the Golden Heights that's just named after him. I don't think he looks at his role as President of the United States as advancing the interests of the United States, or even advancing the interests
of Donald Trump is what he's doing. But I don't know what he would say to me if we said, "Why have you done this?" He wouldn't say these things because they're quite unflattering. It goes back to 2019, the settlement in the illegally occupied Golan Heights that's known as Trump Heights. So Netanyahu probably knows how to play him. I don't know if it's an actual settlement or just they unveil plans to build one and unveil one. So, but that plays into the servicing the ego angle that you're alluding to. What would he say? Why have you done this? Would he actually say, because this is what should happen? I should be treated like a demigod.
Well, you mentioned about the hat that he put that he's released, where Trump was right. I believe he earnestly thinks
I do too.
That his vision for society, and ultimately Trump he's the worst vestiges of capitalism brought into this one horribly orange man. And the fact of the matter is, he believes that this tacky gold skyscraper laden community. He doesn't care about the culture, the religious backgrounds, the reality of what it is to live in Gaza for the last 70 plus years. He doesn't care about that. He believes that there is only one acceptable or really true way of living life, and that is in the eyes of how Donald Trump believes life should be led, how he sees life is.
Yeah, I mean, and then you've got the 50-50. You've got the cognitive dissonance. We can spend time trying to unravel what on earth he thinks he's playing at, but of course the truth could be both simpler and more complicated, where you just have it's both deadly serious and also they're doing it to throw meat to all the people who use phrases like Trump derangement syndrome or claim that, you need to concentrate on what he does, not on what he says. And then, of course, when you concentrate on what he does, that's when you come back with Trump derangement syndrome. It's like a wonderful fig leaf, isn't it, to describe either your support for fascism or your complete failure to recognise it when it hits you over the head with a lamb chop. Boy. What about the final thing? Hang on, briefly. The idea that someone else made it as a Mickey take and he doesn't realise.
I don't believe that's true at all. I think, to be honest with you, a lot of your callers have mentioned about Trump's ego.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people around Trump, Elon Musk, all of the sycophants that he's appointed to these really high seats and really high offices, I think they ultimately understand that the best way to appeal to Trump is to appeal to his ego. Oh, I don't know if you've seen the story about the Department of Education being hacked, and there was an AI video of him sucking Elon Musk's toes.
Yes.
It was.
I have seen it, which is why I let you finish that sentence without having a panic attack about what you were about to say.
Yeah. So if you told me honestly, they said, well, we need to appeal to Trump's ego. If this is the story about Trump AI on the internet, we need something that will transcend that. What's more controversial, whilst also making him look fantastic.
And maybe not even think beyond the question of provocation. Maybe not even think far enough down the line to worry about what the reaction might be. As people have pointed out, embassies have been...
James O'Brien on LBC.
The Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Bennell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish the Prime Minister every success on his trip to Washington. The visit to see President Trump must serve our national interest. The Prime Minister and I are completely united in our support for Ukraine as a proud and sovereign nation. What specific steps will he take to ensure Ukraine is at the negotiating table for any peace settlement?
Well, I thank her for her words about the forthcoming trip. And it is right, and I think the whole House will think it's right, that Ukraine must be at the table at negotiations. There can be no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine. That has been my consistent position in all of the discussions that I've had. That will continue to be my position, because this is about the sovereignty of Ukraine and their ability to decide for themselves the future of their country. So they must be at the table.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for that answer, and as I said, I wish him every success. We want to support him on this issue. So turning to the details of the plan he set out yesterday. Over the weekend, I suggested to the Prime Minister that he cut the aid budget, and I'm pleased that he accepted my advice. Mr. Speaker, it's the fastest response. It's the fastest response I've ever had from the Prime Minister. However, he announced £13.4 billion in additional defence spending yesterday. This morning, his Defence Secretary said the uplift is only £6 billion, which is the correct figure.
Prime Minister.
I'm going to have to let the Leader of the Opposition down gently. She didn't feature in my thinking at all. I was so busy over the weekend I didn't even see her proposal. I think she's appointed herself, saviour of the Western civilization. It's a desperate search for relevance. But Mr. Speaker, look, if you take the numbers for this financial year and then the numbers for the financial year 27-28, that's £13.4 billion increase. That is the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War, which will put us in a position to ensure the security and defence of our country and of Europe.
Mr. Speaker, that wasn't very clear. How is it that the Defence Secretary says £6 billion and he says £13.4 billion? The IFS said today that the government is playing silly games with numbers. How does he find this difference in numbers?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we went through this 2 weeks ago, going through the same question over and over again. So let me say it. If you take the financial year this year, and then you take the financial year for 2027-28, the difference between the two is £13.4 billion. That's the same answer. If you ask again, I'll give the same answer again.
I'll decide when it's more.
Mr. Speaker, someone needs to tell the Prime Minister that being patronising is not a substitute. For answering questions. It's not a substitute. He hasn't answered. What he has said is different from what he said yesterday. We are still not clear where the money is coming from. We want to support him. He's also said that we should put British troops on the ground in Ukraine. We haven't seen the detail of any proposals. Would his new spending plans allow him to fund this commitment effectively?
Prime Minister.
I mean, I think it's the same question again. It's 13.4 billion. That's the difference between this year and 2020. She asked a serious question about the security guarantees in Ukraine, and that is extremely important, because the worst of all outcomes, if there's to be a cessation of hostilities, is that it is a short break rather than sustained and lasting peace. And I think that means there's got to be security guarantees. I've indicated that we will play our full part. There has to be US backing, because otherwise I don't think it will deter Putin. We are working on that. I'm having extensive discussions about it, not in a position to put details before the House, as she well knows today, but I'll continue down that route, because I want a lasting peace in Ukraine and Europe for the safety and security of Ukrainians, of Europeans, and of course for everybody in this country.
Mr. Speaker, this is an endeavour that we want to support him in, but we need to know exactly what it is we're supporting. We need clarity and transparency over the money. We also need to know where this money is going. This morning, the Defence Secretary could not say if the Chagos deal would come out of the defence budget. Can he confirm to the House that none of the defence uplift includes payments for his Chagos deal?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the additional spend I announced yesterday is for our capability on defence and security in Europe, as I made absolutely clear yesterday. The Chagos deal is extremely important for our security, for US security. The US are rightly looking at it. When it's finalised, I'll put it before the House with the costings. The figures being bandied around are absolutely wild of the mark. The deal is well over a century, but the funding I announced yesterday is for our capability to put ourselves in a position to rise to a generational challenge. That is what that money is all about, and I thought she supported it.
Speaker, we need to make sure we are supporting a plan that is clear and transparent. Yesterday, the Prime Minister set an ambition for defence spending to reach 3% in the next Parliament. We agree with him, but this could be 2034, almost a decade away. That is too slow. We don't know how he will pay for it. We cannot raise taxes further. We already pay more on debt interest than defence, and everyone in this House would have heard him not answer the last question. So I will ask him again. Is he paying for the Chagos deal with this defence uplift or not?
Prime Minister. Speaker, I've just dealt with that question. She gave the money announced yesterday is going to our capability to put ourselves in a position to defend the security of our country, Europe and the UK. And she asked about defence spending. She gave what people have described as a rambling speech yesterday when she couldn't say what defence spending should be. We've been absolutely clear. We've set it out, a full, credible, costed plan, and I thought she supported it.
Holly Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that in coastal communities like mine in East Thanet, people develop cancer earlier, get treated and diagnosed later, and die younger. Can he give the House an update on the plans for the government to implement the recommendations by the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, into tackling poor health in our seaside towns?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank her for raising this. She's right that cancer patients are waiting too long for diagnosis and for treatment. Addressing healthcare inequity is part of our 10-year health plan, Mr. Speaker, aiming to halve the gap in healthy life expectancy between the richest and the poorest regions. And we're making progress on that already.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I start by wishing the Prime Minister well on his trip to the White House. It won't be an easy meeting, but we're all behind him for our national interest. But it's already clear that under President Trump, we won't be able to rely on the United States, sadly, to help ensure our security against Russian aggression. And that's why we strongly welcome the Prime Minister's decision to increase Britain's defence spending. But Europe must do far more to rearm in the face of Putin's threat, and the UK must lead on that. That's why we back the idea of a new European rearmament bank, so we can finance a big increase in the manufacturing capacity without the need to cut Britain's vital soft power. So will the Prime Minister look at this idea, work across this House and across Europe, so we can make a European rearmament bank actually happen?
Prime Minister.
I'll resist his suggestion that we've got somehow to choose between the US and our European partners. I do not believe that to be the case, and I want to strengthen our already strong relationship with the US, because I think it's vital that we do so. I, of course, want to work with our European allies on defence capability and what more we need to do in relation to capability, coordination and funding. And in the longer term, there is a discussion going on amongst allies as to future funding. We're part of that discussion, and I'm happy to share that with the House as it evolves.
Sir Ed Davey.
I hope he's successful in keeping the US on board with our European allies, and I'm glad he's talking about finance and defence. I think if he was to push this European Rearmament Bank at the summit on Sunday with European leaders, I think he'd be pushing an open door. Certainly Prime Minister Tusk is supporting from the Polish point of view. But Mr. Speaker, if I can turn now to domestic matters and the cost of living crisis that's hitting so many of our constituents. Families in my constituency are really angry that Thames Water is sending them bills this April that will cost them £150 a year more. Thames has already let down so many people, whether it's leaking pipes or pumping their filthy sewage into our rivers. A third of customers' bills are already used just to pay the interest on Thames Water's debt, and now it's going to borrow £3 billion more. Isn't it time to stop making people pay for bailing out the vulture funds drowning Thames Water in debt? Will his government just put this firm out of its misery, put it into special administration so we can sort out that mess and the mess that lot left?
Well, he's certainly right about the mess that lot made. We've obviously got the water bill. It's got very strong measures in it, and I think he supports them.
Dr. Rosanna Alenko.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We have heard extraordinary rhetoric coming out of Washington in recent days. And
extraordinary rhetoric. I couldn't agree more. Ed Davey doing very well at the moment in the polls, but so is the only party leader who didn't turn up to yesterday's defence debate about Ukraine. So I don't know how much we should read into that. Aggie Chambre is still with me. I think I know what's going on there.
Go on.
I mean, you were right to call it. I don't fully understand. I have an O level in maths and a very low AO statistics, which they made me sit because you're not allowed to give up maths until you're over 16. I then went to the London School of Economics, where I did philosophy. So
I studied philosophy too.
Yeah, so I'm not too embarrassed to tell you. I don't quite understand what the accusation being made about yesterday's announcement is in economic mathematical terms. I do know that if you go to the IFS rather than going to the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph to find out what the IFS has said, they've said, as a minor note to what is a major announcement, the Prime Minister followed in the last government's footsteps by announcing a misleadingly large figure. And then you try and work out why that figure of 13 billion has been used. And the answer is that's the figure you arrive at if you haven't increased defence spending between now and 2027. So if you go to the source, the IFS, rather than just coming on the radio and reading out what the Daily Mail have said about it, if the defence budget would have been otherwise frozen in cash terms, that's how you get to the 13 billion figure. The IFS Associate Director responsible for this story, which he didn't think was a story, which is why he used the phrase as a minor note to what is a major announcement, wrote, "This is, of course, dwarfed by the significance of today's announcement, but it is frustrating nonetheless." So the accusation is that he has used an implausible but technically accurate measure to come up with the figure of 13 billion by telling us what the number would be if defence spending didn't go up at all this year, next year or the year after. So it's not a very big deal. And that's what the IFS say. But Kemi Badenoch has been told or heard someone on the radio or read in the newspaper that it is a big deal. And she's used it as a weapon without understanding what it is that she was trying to say.
Well, it may have been a minor note. However, and the IFS referenced it there, the fact that the Tories did this. And when the Tories did this, they talked about, I think I'm right in saying, £75 billion uplift and compared it to a frozen figure. John Healy, who was then Shadow Defence Secretary, was very rude about it.
But he understood it. She didn't understand the attack line that she was using there.
I mean, she may have understood it and just have been obtuse so she could keep asking the question. And it is a point of disagreement on basically a policy that they both agree on, which does make it difficult to talk about. And, she used Chagos as well. And actually, I thought it was striking that he actually didn't really respond about Chagos. It sounded like to me, I'm not sure about you, James, that actually the money
You
to
wanted a
rent
yes
out,
or a no there, didn't you? And he didn't give a yes. Is that because if you've got 20 quid and you're due to spend £2 of it on chips, and then I give you another £5, and I say, are you going to be spending any of that extra £5 on chips? It's actually a really silly question. But he could have just said no.
He could have just... I mean, it sounded like to me from listening to that, the answer is yes. Because if the answer was going to be no, and Chagos...
But how do you distinguish between the new money and the old money? If you're going to say, are you going to be spending any of the new money on that thing that you were going to be spending some of the old money on? How do you... Anyway, we've got to go to the ads. We'll come back shortly, and I'll read out some of your responses as well. But if you are... this is not for you, obviously. But if you are going to be using this is for Kemi Badenoch and client journalists. If you are going to be using what the Institute of Fiscal Studies say about something, the best place to go to find out what the Institute of Fiscal Studies says about something is the Institute of Fiscal Studies.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's about being able to admit to yourself that you don't understand something, I think. Psychologically is perhaps the best way to understand it. Let's run through some of your responses. It gets to the point, writes Connor, where you begin to feel a little bit sorry for her. Oops, maybe I'm being patronising. I apologise. I did not mishear Kemi Badenoch accusing somebody else of being patronising.
So I'm going to very, very respectfully slightly disagree with you here, James. She
definitely said
that.
Yeah. That's all
I'm not disagreeing with that, absolutely not. I actually thought that he did sound a tiny bit patronising when he was explaining that to her. And it may be because he was explaining it for a second time. It may be because he was frustrated. It may be because he's had 24 hours of people asking questions about this. When he wanted this to be a big win.
It may be because he intended to be patronising.
It may be because he intended to be but I slightly winced as I heard him say that. And it's not the first time I've heard the word patronising in reference to Prime Minister's questions. Other people around Westminster have said he's got to be careful with his tone because sometimes it does feel like there's a bit of a mismatch because
and there's a male-female dimension to it as well, which doesn't work in his favour.
Exactly.
And there's a huge imbalance in basic intelligence as well, but that's me being patronising.
But somebody said to me, at some stage she's going to snap and she's going to say, stop patronising me, and it's going to be quite powerful. And actually when she said it, I was like, okay, well, there's the moment. I'm not necessarily sure it was quite powerful, but I do think that he needs to be careful. And I think in that moment, actually, she was probably right to call him out.
And as a man listening to a woman, I have to respect that more perhaps than I would if it was coming from a man, because it's a trap into which many of us can fall, even with the best of intentions. Indeed, as Marita says, he was, capital letters, very patronising. And then Joep, which I think is a man's name, says, my response to Badenoch's first question was, that's a really good question. Let's see where it goes. And then the second question came and I thought, and that was it for intelligent questions. John in Leeds says, one trick, Kemi isn't getting any better at this, is she? How can she stand there and go through this routine every week and not feel like a total? And then there's a word I haven't come across before, so it's either a typo or something I'm not going to repeat on the radio, just in case it's rude. I'm sure it isn't John in Leeds. Callum says she actually writes these questions about a week in advance and doesn't deviate from her notes, does she? She's either just not listening or she simply can't process that he'd actually answered the questions. That's not true with regard to the Chagos one, I don't think. And James speaks for a lot of people when he says it's hard to tell if she's being deliberately disingenuous or completely stupid. And finally, Maria says that was an open goal and she hit the post. But you think it was better than in some I didn't hear the one 2 weeks ago, which apparently was the best yet in terms of not going terribly well. Lewis was in the chair. I'd come away from that feeling okay, probably.
I think that's right. I mean, I had the misfortune of watching the PMQs 2 weeks ago, and I actually was genuinely taken aback. It was quite difficult to watch at times. I felt a bit sorry for her. So I think that is in my head, to be honest, because obviously there wasn't a PMQs last week. So actually, I would say that one, well, it was significantly better than the one 2 weeks ago. And actually, I'm afraid I can't remember who texted in, but I thought the first question was good, actually, because that basically it's something that Rishi Sunak started doing after he stopped being Tory leader, when actually I thought his PMQs were at their best, when he was no longer Prime Minister and leader of the opposition, actually saying, you know what, I agree with you, let's start from a position of agreement and then work out where we go from here. And actually that's what she did in that first question, and asked a pretty sensible question. He didn't really have an answer, but that's okay, I think. I think they're going to work that out. But then, as we've talked about just before the break, I think on the figures, she should have asked that once if she wanted to ask that at all. He explained that, and then we got into the difficulty because then he became patronising, in my words, and also in her words. And actually then on British troops, I thought that was a reasonable question as well, which he answered quite reasonably. Chagos as well, we talked about this, the fact that he didn't really answer. I think Chagos is interesting because it's something the Tories want to make a big deal of, but also there are a few Labour backbenchers and actually a few people in government feeling a bit worried about that deal too as well. So I think that is something that is probably worth her highlighting.
It's also something that we probably should do a bigger explainer on ourselves, because the massive bulk of the negotiation was undertaken by previous governments. But I haven't heard James Cleverly on this, or somebody like that. Were they intending never to do a deal, or were they intending to do a completely different deal?
Well, basically, the negotiations stopped. So they did 11 rounds of negotiations under the previous government, which was started off because there was this advisory from the ICJ that they should give up the Chagos Islands, the government should. And then negotiations stalled or did appear to stop under the previous government. And then there was the 12th round of negotiations under this government. And that's when it all became quite public over the summer that actually they were about to give them away. And of course, the sticking point is about the money and Diego Garcia, which is the military base for the UK and the US.
Ultimately, Donald Trump will probably have, again, we have to wait and see, don't we? Because you can't make any predictions about him. On that patronising issue, Katie writes, and she describes herself as a histrionic woman. She writes, Badenoch is the most patronising individual I've observed in a very long time. To accuse Starmer is classic Freudian projection on her part. Can I disagree with Katie, or would that be patronising?
You're very welcome to disagree with Katie.
I think two things can be true at the same time, can't they? So he was patronising, but she is always very patronising.
Yeah,
so
I agree with that.
It's an odd opening to pursue, I think. Oh, anything else?
I think that's it. I thought Ed Davey did well today. I think Ed Davey actually pretty consistently does well at the moment.
He does, doesn't he? Why?
Because he is able to be a bit freer with his language. They see themselves, the Lib Dems see themselves as the party that can be very critical of Donald Trump and can basically say whatever they want at the moment. So I think while the government is very constrained, they're obsessed with this discipline over Donald Trump, the Lib Dems can basically say what a lot of MPs are thinking.
And he is doing. And he's doing it very calmly, isn't he? And you're seeing a big bounce in the polling that I've seen today, albeit we're 4 years out from an election. So I'm always reminded that I think Margaret Thatcher was 20 points behind in 1980 after coming to power in 1979, and we know how that story ends. But the idea that a nice, sensible man is there seems to be sort of reaching parts that other Liberal Democrat leaders since Nick Clegg haven't managed to reach. I
think so. And also, they have their policies that they really, really want to push on. One of them is being very critical of Donald Trump, if you can call that a policy. One is the NHS, one is social care. And, we know those are things that people are really, really worried about. And if the Lib Dems are able to kind of make the point that under them, the NHS and social care would be fixed. I mean, lots of people have promised that the NHS and social care would be fixed under them. It hasn't happened quite yet. But I think that is appealing. I also think if you are a party that isn't about to win power or even nearly about to win power, you can talk about fixing social care in a way that is much easier than people who are about to go into government. There's some nice work. Dean in Cologne, I think, is a bit warmer towards Kemi Badenoch. Well, he's more of an equal opportunities critic. Keir doesn't give straight, explicit answers either, just like the Tories. He could have given a clearer answer on the Chagos deal funding. He is disappointing. And Isaac also picks up on that. It was a strong opening question. He writes, I thought that perhaps she'd be about to put in a strong PMQs and then she completely muffed it. That was awful for Badenoch. The truth lies somewhere between the two. Neither of them will be doing laps of honour around the office, I don't think, after that. It's funny, isn't it? Because we used to be quite critical, I used to be quite critical of Keir Starmer in PMQs, and I actually don't think he's particularly good at it, although he does seem better with Kemi Badenoch, better than he was with Rishi Sunak. Maybe. The irony, of course, that everyone said she was going to wipe the floor with him. Where did that come from, Aggie? You've been in the lobby. Where did because I didn't watch it very closely. There was so much going on, wasn't there, in the last various Conservative administrations that you kind of tended to focus on
people who'd gone a little further down the line of prominence. So where did the idea come from that she was good at this sort of thing?
It's a really good question, because she didn't do a lot of... She didn't do that much media.
No.
There's a sort of suggestion that she was scared of media. I mean, she hasn't done a lot of media since she became leader of the opposition. But I think there is this idea that she shoots in the hip, says what she means, and she can be good at the dispatch box, especially when she was in a department where she was looking after one brief. And so I think she was kind of seen as someone that was very on top of her brief. But to be completely honest, I think she was pretty untested.
And it's not just, so you could say she's good at shooting from the hip, but not when it's a dialogue or an exchange. But that speech she gave yesterday, as Starmer referred to, despite some rumours I've heard about the authorship, it was often incoherent. So what I mean, if you were absolutely, if I gave you a truth serum, what's her greatest strength?
I have seen her able to shine, genuinely. I have seen her able to listen. I've listened to her talk. I'm thinking of when she did an hour-long phone-in with Ian Dale, and I thought she was convincing, coherent and lucid.
Okay.
And I don't know what it was about that
Context, medium.
Context.
Probably
maybe
Ian's lovely manner.
It was probably Ian.
Yeah,
she just talked to Ian more.
So that could be it. If she gets Ian Dale to sit next to her at PMQs, and of course, if it wasn't for that unfortunate episode involving Tunbridge Wells, he could have been sitting next to her at PMQs, and everything would have been okay.
Everything would have been fine.
God,
alas,
talk
wasn't
about
to be.
the path not taken, eh? Talk about the alternative universe, the counterfactual, the world where Ian Dale would have been sitting on the front bench. Complete change of pace next. There's an extraordinary play at the Young Vic called Punch. It's by my friend, I think he would allow me to say, James Graham, who also wrote This Is England, the Gareth Southgate play at the National, and Ink, that extraordinary analysis of Rupert Murdoch's career, and loads and loads and loads and loads of other things. And it's about a lad who is a sort of single punch, Dear England, not This Is England, that's a completely different project, about a lad who punched a stranger once, and it was a fatal punch. And he has himself become a criminal justice campaigner in the relevant areas, turning this hideous tragedy into an attempt to do some good. And James has turned James Hodgkinson's story into a play. James Graham has turned James Hodgkinson's story into a play, and we'll be sitting down with James Hodgkinson after the headlines with Amelia Cox.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:34 is the time. I have to choose my words carefully because I'm not for legal reasons, but for important technical reasons. James Hodgkinson died after a stranger threw a single punch at him while he was in Nottingham to watch a test match in 2011. That stranger was jailed for manslaughter because the punch was not intended to kill. Neither would a single punch often result in that tragic conclusion. He was 19 years old, as I say, when he was jailed for manslaughter, and his name is Jacob Dunne. And Jacob joins me now because this story, and crucially I think, the story that James Hodgkinson's parents played in, helping you to turn your life around or to embark upon a very different path, has been turned into a play by I was going to say the finest playwright of our generation, but you're younger than me, so I'll say the finest playwright of his generation, James Graham. I know you've answered this question a lot, and I know that you do a lot of work in schools where children presumably stand on ceremony even less than I do, but just talk us through what actually happened on the day, if you can.
So I was on a night out with my friends and got separated from my friends. We were celebrating a friend's 18th birthday, and, unfortunately, the kind of values that we had developed as a group of young people was that you've always got to have your friends back, and that means, aggressively if anybody starts. And we all believed that, and we didn't really ask questions if trouble came calling, especially under the influence of alcohol, which is never an excuse either. And got a phone call from a friend saying that there was some trouble kicking off, me being the person that I was back then, kind of went running to aid them, didn't ask any questions, saw what I perceived to be as conflict, and threw a single punch, and then ran away and didn't really think anything of it. In fact, my friends kind of came around the next day and said, "Oh, well done, one punch, you know," and it was like a badge of honour. Getting into scraps, and it kind of built trust between us as peers groups.
They thought you'd knocked him out at that point, or did
they thought I'd knocked him out, and that.
When did you find out that he'd died?
I found out a month later. So I was moving on with my life, not knowing anything had happened. But in reality, it took 9 days. 9 days later, James had passed away from his injuries. And yeah, unbeknown to me, I didn't know. And there was an investigation going on to find out who did it. And I'd been on holiday with my mum in Tenerife, on a family holiday. And then when we came back, the police came knocking on all my friends' doors, and eventually I had to hand myself in and find out that I was being arrested for murder, and trying to piece all that together and try and understand and process the fact that that had even happened to me and to them.
And speaking of them, you didn't go on trial for murder, but you were convicted of manslaughter, sent down at the age of 19. When did you first encounter James's parents?
I first heard about James's parents after I was released from custody, through my probation officer. There'd been a referral made by them to ask me questions and make contact with me. And this goes to a really important point that I'm passionate about in terms of our justice system and how it supports victims of crime. Because the fact that I went guilty, had an early guilty plea, meant that none of the facts came out.
Okay.
That they weren't able to present a victim statement, impact statement, that they weren't able to have any of their questions answered. And so the fact that I went guilty early saved them the gruelingness of a trial and me not admitting responsibility, but at the same time left a load of questions unanswered.
So it denied them something
so
as well.
So it denied them a type of justice as well. And I think this is what we tend to do. Our justice system is designed around who caused the harm and how do we punish them. And then we tell victims that that's punishment. Justice has been served. Now the punishment has been handed down. But often it leaves a lot of unanswered questions. And they were trying to find out, what's Jacob doing in prison? Is he doing rehabilitation? Is he engaging in programs? Is he trying to learn new skills? Is he sorting out his mental health? But they couldn't get any of those answers. And then they were courageous enough to go, is there any other alternative? Is there any way that we can get answers to these questions? And then they found out that there's a thing called restorative justice, which is where you bring victims and perpetrators together to try and have a restorative conversation aimed at repairing the harm and expressing the harm and repairing it.
Why did you agree to that meeting? That first one?
I agreed to take part because I felt like it was the least I could do. I didn't want to hold anything over them. I didn't want to have any control and if I had answers to questions that they had, then the least I can do is answer them. I didn't think I would benefit in any way from answering those questions, but I thought that they might, and it might give them some peace and help them be able to move forward.
And I mean, that in some ways is one of the central thrusts of the play, is that it did turn out to be not just of benefit to them, as you hoped and intended, but also of enormous benefit to you. They took a proper interest in your life. Yeah,
they took a proper interest in my life, and, the people who I'd harmed the most were the ones that were judging me the least. Mm-hmm. And it became clear that what was more important was me learning from my mistakes, trying to do everything I possibly can to repair the harm, which I never will be able to do. But it's kind of what has fueled the last 14 years of the campaigning that I've been doing and the endless schools I've been...
Often alongside Joan Schofield.
Often alongside Joan Schofield, the mother.
James.
And then through different mediums as well. And once this story ended up being pitched towards James Graham's direction, I wasn't a massive theatre goer, but I now appreciate the power of theatre in terms of that medium, in terms of telling stories.
And drama in general.
And drama in general.
That's not an obvious parallel, but the post office scandal didn't land with the British public until it had been turned into a dramatic exercise. Must have been weird, though, going along to rehearsals and seeing yourself being portrayed on stage.
Yes. I have to detach myself a little bit in terms of like the creative side of it. As a creative consultant on the project, what I've been doing for years is sharing my story. I am a storyteller and a facilitator of stories, and so I understand how to pitch it to a bunch of men in prison as opposed to a load of children's nurses in a hospital. Or to a social worker's perspective to a single mother, and how they resonate to the story.
So what I mean, if you go into a school, either with or without Joan, what do you do? What do you give to the children?
Well, there's a range of options that I can do. There are workshops around healthy relationships, how to express yourself, because what I learned from taking part in restorative justice is about how do you have healthy conversations. And, you have this all the time. You're interviewing members of the public all the time, and people are getting riled up, and people are emotional, and people are involved in conflict, whether it's trivial conflict or whether it's really painful conflict and stuff, open wounds that you're not dealt with. But we need to find a way to facilitate those conversations in a way where conflict is de-escalated and where people can find some sort of a place for this kind of conflict to reside in a more peaceful place.
Yes.
And so that's kind of why I deliver restorative practice. So I help teachers help students through training in restorative practices. And then with the students themselves, I do mentoring and coaching and deliver workshops with them around what healthy relationships look like, what their value systems are, unpicking bits of toxic masculinity, I guess, as well, and how they express themselves in the world in a more healthy way.
I should have said earlier that I think in large part as a consequence of their intervention in your life, you went on a completely different course, went off to study criminology at university, got a first. So when you talk like this, you're speaking as an expert in a field that you only ended up in as a consequence of tragedy.
Yeah.
And I know that James's mother has said in the past that it took her a long time to come to terms with what happened, but working with you, I think he's earned the forgiveness. I know that he didn't do it with any intent to my son, that my son hadn't done anything, that it was just a mistake. So that's like a headline moment. It's an easy to understand progress or success, for want of a better word. In the context of your work with young people, what does success look like? How do you know when you've reached the parts that other interventions might not have reached?
Well, this is the problem of any intervention.
Isn't it?
There are whether it's the prevent program and radicalization, whether it's misogynistic views and violence against women. There are lots of people delivering interventions to try and persuade to put people on different paths and to challenge unhealthy ways of thinking. But we never really know.
You can't count the success.
You can't count the success in that type of way. So what I see myself as I'm a horticulturalist in a way. I'm planting seeds and I'm creating the conditions where that those things might impact on people. But I guess it's just the messages I receive saying, I was on a night out and I didn't throw a punch. That's it.
Isn't
that's
it?
it.
And a lot of people won't get in touch with you to tell you that.
They won't tell me. Or they'll say, I've stopped hanging around with that friendship group that were taking me down, that were exploiting me or grooming me.
Which is where you began your story with us today. It's a story you tell yourself in your book, Right from Wrong. I presume, given that you were involved in the creative process of the play, that there hasn't been a moment where you sort of watched it for the first time, or was there?
There was a moment in rehearsals where I watched it for the first time, yeah. I watched it with David and Joan in rehearsals.
What was that like?
That was really intense because I knew I had seen the script as it's developed in various draft forms, but we wanted them to kind of see it as opposed to just reading it in rehearsals, and just the unknown, I guess, that comes with that. But there was one really important part that was changed from their perspective and from mine, is that there was a line in the play that said, it was an accident. But the thing is, and this is for all the listeners out there, you can't accidentally throw a punch. You know, you can't accidentally throw a punch. I didn't intend to cause harm, but you always run the risk when you lose control and you throw a fist. And you've lost the argument as soon as you resort to violence.
Final question, I think. There's two strands to it, Jacob. One is about whether or not you still have any contact with them, and if you do, what do your former mates or your mates at the time make of the journey that you've been on subsequently?
Unfortunately, the ones that because a smart person is someone that learns from other person's mistakes.
Yeah.
But some of us have to learn from our own mistakes, and sadly, some of my friends have paid the ultimate price and are now in prison for life or are in 6 feet in the grave, because that's the only thing that eventually comes from living that lifestyle. But the others, they are massive supporters of me and my work. They're now proud fathers, and we move forward together to try and create safer communities for men and boys who are at risk of going down these paths.
It's incredible work, and of course it can't be done on the scale that you do it or with the impact that you do it without that element of restorative justice.
Exactly.
As you say, working hand in hand with Joan and David, they've made enormous changes to your life, and you have, whether you're comfortable with the conclusion or not, you've obviously, despite this incredibly negative impact you've had on their life, you would have had positive impacts as well. That's what restorative justice does. Do you ever think about where you would have been without that intervention, if you'd come out the path, not, if you'd gone further down the path that led you into jail in the first place?
Yeah, I would have ended up with those friends who were locked up in prison, or I would have with a grieving mother.
Jacob, thank you, mate. I know you tell the story often, but it doesn't diminish or dilute from the power that it contains, which is a testament to your storytelling abilities and the fact that your qualifications to tell these stories are unique, albeit that James Graham has turned your book into a magnificent play, which is moving from the Nottingham Playhouse production to the Young Vic in London. Julie Hedgeman-Houch, who is in it, has been on Full Disclosure. I think she was in rehearsals when I met her, and I could see the impact that it was having on her. It's one of those pieces of art that touches everybody involved in it in ways that very few pieces of art do.
And it's a human story.
Yes,
it is a unique situation that I found myself in, which is bittersweet, but at the same time it is relevant to everybody, because it's about redemption, it's about forgiveness, it's about how we make the most of the tragedy that we will all face inevitably in our lives, and how we move forward with that in a way that is the most healthy way possible.
And it opens at the Young Vic here in London on the 1st of March. Jacob, thank you. It's 10-1.
James O'Brien on LBC.
53 is the time, and before Jacob came in, I was just glancing at the article Simon Marks, a characteristically punchy article Simon Marks has written for the LBC website about the changes that Donald Trump's early days in the White House signal to almost everything. But it's one in particular that I want to pick up on with our US editor now, and it is some fairly significant changes, Simon, to the way in which press conferences are going to be conducted at the White House, or indeed the access that the Fourth Estate will have to the executive.
Yes, that's absolutely right, James. What we witnessed yesterday at the hands of the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was the first stirrings of an effort by the new president to eviscerate the White House Correspondents Association. And the White House Correspondents Association is the organization that since 1914, when it first came into being, has basically managed press relations between journalists, the Fourth Estate here in the United States, and successive presidential administrations. And this announcement came as a complete bolt from the blue. Let's have a listen to Caroline Leavitt as she made the announcement.
I am proud to announce that we are going to give the power back to the people who read your papers, who watch your television shows, and who listen to your radio stations. Moving forward, the White House press pool will be determined by the White House press team. Legacy outlets who have participated in the press pool for decades will still be allowed to join. Fear not. but we will also be offering the privilege to well-deserving outlets who have never been allowed to share in this awesome responsibility. As part of these changes, we will continue the rotation amongst the 5 major television networks to ensure the president's remarks are heard far and wide around this world. We will add additional streaming services which reach different audiences than traditional cable and broadcast. This is the ever-changing landscape of the media in the United States today.
The ever-changing landscape, a move to democratize the situation at the White House. But that's simply not the case. What they're planning to do now is to make sure that those legacy outlets that she referred to, established news organizations, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox News, the New York Times, Politico, are no longer necessarily going to make up the daily pool that accompanies the president wherever he goes, gathers pictures on behalf of the entire press corps, distributes information and dispatches explaining exactly what is going on behind the walls of the White House to all of us. And they're going to stuff those spots with people from news organizations that are not really news organizations, but propaganda outlets filled with polemicists who are pro-Donald Trump.
This is the crucial point. The likelihood of critical questioning diminishes with every change to the rotation.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, James, they're not at this point shutting people out of the White House, although, of course, they have already barred the Associated Press from attending events with Donald Trump because the AP, the nation's most revered news agency, will not call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, as Donald Trump insists it must now be called. So they're not controlling access to the building at this point, but it's particularly these pools that get formed every single day so that people like me, when I'm not at the White House but working in my office on the other side of the street, get dispatches from pool reporters that I can trust because they come from the nation's leading news organizations telling me that the president's about to start speaking, he's 2 minutes away. They describe some of the color in the room that I am then able to relay to listeners and readers. All of that is going to be placed in the hands of polemicists. And then there will be the issue of who does President Trump call on to ask questions? Yeah. And when he was standing next to Emmanuel Macron on Monday, and we may see this again tomorrow when he stands next to the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, the first question did not go in time-honoured fashion to Reuters. The AP wasn't even in the room. NBC, National Public Radio. It went to a bloke called Brian. And we all thought, well, who's Brian? Because I wasn't aware of Brian at all. And it turns out that Brian is a bloke called Brian Glenn, who is the new White House correspondent for an outfit called Real America's Voice Television, which is a far-right web and broadcast distributed 24/7 propaganda outlet for Trump. Asks Trump a softball question, how great do you think your poll numbers really are? And by the way, Brian just happens to be the partner of Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Georgia congresswoman who believes that forest fires in California are started by Jewish-controlled space lasers.
That's one of her more sensible opinions.
So that's where they're taking it.
I hesitate to ask this question, but I have to. This is unlikely to be the end of the process that you're describing.
Oh, absolutely, just the beginning. This is the opening salvo was the ban on AP. This is the second round of fire, and they are definitely determined to change the makeup of the press corps, not just at the White House, but at the State Department and at the Pentagon. They've already at the Pentagon evicted NBC, Politico, National Public Radio and the New York Times, and I think also CNN from their offices at the Pentagon. And they've handed that real estate over to Breitbart News, to the Daily Caller, to all of these far-right organizations that they do not consider legacy media. But it's a commentary on the scale of what they're doing, that even the senior White House correspondent for Fox News, Jackie Heinrich, who's a member of the White House Correspondents Association board, took them to task yesterday and said this was an attempt to muzzle the free press.
I suppose moment to remember that Fox News did belatedly and eventually tell the truth about the election that Donald Trump claimed that he'd won, and of course ended up in all sorts of financial peril themselves. But Donald Trump would not see that as a mitigating factor, I don't imagine. Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent. Thank you so much, as always, providing invaluable, across the LBC schedule, insights into what is going on the ground. I wonder how long he'll be able to get into that room. Last word, though, today goes to David, who's been in touch to tell us all that my cat is called Brian. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, which contains the best bits, some of the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Sawbrick with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now.
James O'Brien on LBC.